Welcome to the Leadership Conversations podcast. I'm your host, Jono White. I'm the founder and principal consultant of Clarity. We are an Australian-based consultancy that works with leaders around the world, and our passion is to invest in people to become everything they're meant to be in order to fill the world with healthy organizations that people love to work for and customers line up to buy from. The goal of this podcast is to invest in you and your leadership. If you're just joining us for the first time, then feel free to check out consultclarity.org. That's our website, consultclarity.org. We have so many free resources on there. The most popular being our 7 Questions on Leadership series. We've had more than 1,500 leaders from around the world in all different sectors give their in-depth answers on leadership, what books they love, what they found most challenging, the most meaningful stories, how they structure their time through the day. That's free, so go and check it out. And we'd love to interview you about your leadership. I believe you have advice from your experience, your context, and your life so far that is important and can help other leaders. It's also a great way to give back. It's free to get involved, and you can do so by going to consultclarity.org/7-questions-interest, or just Google consultclarity.org 7 questions interest and fill out the form that pops up. We have a free resource for you on our website. It's called Leadership Survival Guide. It's a 57-page ebook. It has interviews with 10 world-class leaders, and you can go to consultclarity.org. It's right at the top, and get that today. We also have a daily email that we send out to over 15,000 leaders, and that email contains the highlights, our best content from our podcasts, our blog, my book, the books that we're loving that are out there about leadership. It's also the best way to get access to our masterclasses and workshops before anyone else. And there's also exclusive and limited special options just for subscribers. And you can subscribe by going to consultclarity.org/subscribe. Now, my gift to you is to work incredibly hard to provide the best leadership content I can to invest in you and your leadership. So if you're finding our content helpful, if you find this podcast helpful, then your gift to me could be this. If you do find it helpful, then write a review or rate our content and make sure you subscribe or follow. I can't emphasize enough how helpful that is. It really does help us to get the word out there so we can invest in more leaders to become everything they're meant to be. It also means a lot to me personally when people like you and people in our community share our content on social media. So if you do that, then please do look for me, Jono White, to tag me, and look to tag Clarity on whatever platform you're on. And our team, including me, I'm always looking to see when people have mentioned us so that I can engage with you. And also we look at sharing content. So if you write something about something we've done, there's also a good chance we'll share that with our followers. So if you could do that, that is a massive, massive help as we try to invest in as many leaders as we can around the world. Last of all, you can check out my book about how to deal with difficult people even if you hate conflict. It's called Step Up or Step Out. It's available on Amazon. You can just look up Step Up or Step Out Jono White, or you can go to store.consultclarity.org/book and check it out there. I have coached leader after leader after leader, and in more than 50% of the sessions, this topic comes up. How do I deal with this person? I'm finding it really difficult, and I just want to find a way that doesn't blow up to do just to have a difficult conversation, to lead them better. How do I do that? There's a 3-step process that I outline in this book that I believe can help you. Okay, let's get into today's episode of the Leadership Conversations podcast. Enjoy. Welcome to another episode of the Leadership Conversations podcast. Today's guest is Jan Terkelsen. Jan is the co-director and co-host of the podcast called People Leaders. Welcome to the podcast, Jan.
Thank you, Jono. Great to be here.
Tell us all, I guess to start off, Jan, it's great to have you here. Tell us all a bit about yourself and about People Leaders and about the podcast.
Okay, well, when you introduced me, you said, the co-director and co-podcast host. And the reason why it's co is because I'm in business with my twin sister, Michelle, and which is a wonderful opportunity for us to work together because we're very similar, but also very different in some of our outlook, which makes a great team. And we decided a couple of years ago, I think it's about 7 or 8 years ago now, that we would create our own business because we were independent consultants working, for, about 18 years, I think, in different industries, doing leadership programs, training, consulting, coaching. And we decided that we wanted to create something a little bit different. And we, formed our own business. And then part of that was doing the podcast, which we absolutely love because we get to speak to people from all around the world about the topics that our people are interested in hearing, but also we learn as well. And that's one of the things that really excite us. So we create leadership programs for businesses, and a lot of them, it's interesting, like most people want programs that are very bespoke and particular to them. But what we've found over the years that there are central themes that really kind of, move through each organization. And some of those themes are, and we boiled it down, I think, to, like four main areas that when organizations get these things right, most things work really well. And did I hear you ask what they are, Jono?
I was holding back. I was holding back. I literally thought that and thought I'll let Jen finish. But please tell us.
of, of, of course, like it's kind of like just the four, I think, fundamentals of, how to create a great organization or team or a coordinated group. And the four areas are goals. So, do you have a really clear vision or direction going forward? Like, where am I headed? So, I think that's a really important thing, your direction. The second one is clarity, role clarity, because people want to know where they fit in and what's expected of them. And we find that when people have role clarity, there's less ambiguity, there's less anxiousness, they're just clearer, and everyone loves clarity. And so the third one are processes. When people have some really good, robust processes in place, it just helps them do the work that they need to do in order to get where they need to get. And then the fourth is fundamental are relationships. When you've got trusted relationships where I know that I feel safe to say that I don't know, that say that, I made a mistake and I can totally be myself, like I don't have to really mask anything, that's when, I find you have the most robust organizations. And when leaders really understand those fundamentals and live it, that's when I find, there's a real synergy of leadership that happens. Meaning, like, everyone, I think, has the desire to lead themselves. And as a leader, if we can either teach the fundamentals of leadership, you can really create that, I don't know, that egalitarian structure. And because everyone wants to rise to their own natural of self leadership rather than kind of like being told what to do. So instead of following, we have like that coordinated way of operating. And I know it sounds very nirvana-ish, but I have seen organisations and teams do it. Like if this is the job that needs to be done, who is the right person, who has the capacity, who has the
Mm,
availability, can we be open and transparent about it? And it takes a bit of trust to do that.
yeah.
But yeah, when it works, man, it's just so much fun, to work like that.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's honestly one of the highlights of life to be part of an organization and team that runs like that. And I always
Mm,
love saying to leaders, it's important to do that because it's right, and yes, it's enjoyable. But the really cool thing about what you do with teams and organizations is there are people in these teams and organizations who may never in their life up to this point have experienced this level of health in relationships and the things you mentioned. And to think that even past family, like even to think that there are people who may have had a pretty dysfunctional family, may have worked in some pretty dysfunctional places. I think for me that's what makes it particularly special when you can create teams that do healthy conflict, like you said, that people can really own up to their mistakes and their weaknesses and feel comfortable doing that,
Mm,
saying what they don't
mm,
know. For some people that's the first time they'll ever experience that, and that just, yeah, that really blows my mind when you think of it from that
mm.
perspective.
Oh yeah, I've got goosebumps because and that's what I love about teaching and sharing is that what makes it really meaningful is that it just isn't one dimensional. It's not just at work and in this situational scenario. When you really understand those fundamentals of leadership and communication, it actually imbues everything that you do,
Mm.
at home, at work, in your relationships, the way in which you bring up your children. Even, my children now are, 25 and 26. And, we've often talked about family values and what values do we actually want to agree to, and instead of, like team agreements, we had family agreements.
Mm-hmm.
And part of the conversation was, like, what do we want to agree to? What kind of, and we didn't use the word culture because that wasn't part of their understanding, but it
Yeah.
was like, how do we actually want to operate around here? And, we would write it down and just the the next part was, so okay, now that we've agreed that we want to have fun, we want a house that's clean, we want to be able to we want to be kind, and there were a couple of other things that we agreed to. The second part is, okay, so now we've agreed that this is how we want to operate. How do we hold each other to account? Not just pointing the finger and saying, you not doing this, but how do we hold ourselves and each other to account? And I think that's where the richness comes in, to have
Mm.
that ability to have the conversation without, finger pointing and making someone wrong when you get off track, because
Yeah.
that's what happens. We're human beings. We're going to get off track and we're going to get on track. And I think the sooner we can get back on track, that's great and healthy. But, that's just what makes us human when we get off track, you know?
Yeah, I love what you mentioned there about family. I think that's something that my wife Liz and I have talked about before, is having some sort of values and for us, I love Patrick Lencioni's work, and
Yeah.
yeah, and so I've applied some of that, and you do have to look at it differently. He actually has a book where he applies it to the family, which is really interesting.
Mm,
Which is
mm, mm.
I can't remember what it's called, but it's really cool how the principles go beyond a team, go beyond an organization, and you can apply it elsewhere. And for us, I know that there were just some things that we said, these are going to be some filters for decisions that we make, which is like what you just said there, and just some ideas that as you wrestle with these things, you come up with some of these phrases that you go, yeah, actually, that really nails it. That's how we want to live, and it's it's incredibly powerful. So you definitely can take some of these ideas in teams and organizations and take the principles and tweak it like how you did without using the word culture. You just make it work in your family. I love that idea.
Mm. Well, that's what just makes it real and meaningful. And, when Michelle and I teach some of these principles on leadership, we always refer to family and relationships because we want people to really, I don't know, own the information and to see
Mm,
where they can apply it to every area in their life. Like we use a lot of psychometric tools, like Myers Briggs and 360 feedback and things like that. And
yeah.
when they can start to see the connection, like even simple things around introversion and extroversion,
Mm-hmm.
50% of the population have this tendency for introversion, even though it doesn't sound like that, because extroverts are, usually louder, and they, speak more often and interrupt, etc. When people understand why people operate the way they do, instead of judging them and making them wrong, they go, oh, that's just the way they operate. So, for example, there's always someone in the meeting who, keeps on talking and repeating themselves, and they think, well, haven't they already said that? But what's happening is they're actually coming to a conclusion about their thought process, and we're actually hearing their thought process, and that's what extroverts do. They extrovert their thinking, whereas people with introversion, they actually think about it beforehand inside their head, and then they actually articulate it if they're invited to. And so when we understand that, oh, this person isn't just trying to take over, they're just trying to clarify, this sense of being non-judgmental and being a little bit more accepting, it doesn't necessarily make it a way of always operating, but you're just a little bit, I don't know, understanding of differences and diversity
Mm-hmm.
when you understand how people operate. And I think, if I was going to boil leadership down to two areas, it
Mm.
would be know thyself and
Mm-hmm.
understand the impact that you're having on others.
Yeah, I
And
like that.
and when you operate from that, and they're big. I know they're big, chunky, pieces of work. But the most impactful leaders that I have seen and worked with and operated with is they understand themselves. Like
Yeah.
they really work on themselves. And part of that is understanding how you are impacting others, in your
Mm-hmm.
communication or your demeanor or the way in which you, walk into a room. They
Yeah.
understand that as a leader, you are a role model. People are looking at your behavior and making meaning out of that.
Mm. Yeah, it's so true. And I think the encouragement for leaders of people in your organizations as well is when you do an assessment like what you've just described there, Jan, some of the things that you do, you can facilitate your people, helping your people understand themselves better. And therefore, so when you
Mm,
like, that's one of the richest things you can bring to people in your organization is ask, what could I do, whether you do it yourself internally or bring someone else in, what could I do to help my people understand themselves better and understand each other better?
mm,
And so much
mm,
of, I don't know about you, but I find so much of my work ends up being in those areas, because if you can get 10% improvement in those areas, it's like all these other symptoms, all these other issues that are boiling, they get a bit better. It's because it affects everything.
oh, yeah. It affects absolutely everything. Because, like, when you know yourself, you know when to push and pull back and ask for support. And you know that you're being triggered. And when you're triggered, you're going to be a little bit more sensitive or, I don't know, cynical and all those kind of things. So, understanding oneself is absolutely the basis of any program that we ever do. The first one is know thyself. That's our kind of like module one in any leadership program, and
Mm.
it's always the one that most people get the most, from, and that's why we always start with it, because it's foundational. And then, the part about the impact,
Mm.
you understand the impact by observation and reflection and feedback. It's like, I'm going to ask for feedback. And, when you can ask for feedback, depending on, and there are a number of ways that you can ask for feedback, and can be formal, informal, third party, but just be open to receiving information, I think
Mm.
is a really healthy way of operating. And so what we do with teams sometimes is, because we get a lot of um, feedback from teams saying, like, we're always attending meetings, and, they're not as productive as what we'd like them to be. And, the question, coaching question is, okay, so what would that look like if they were? And what would it take, etc. And then have a go at just changing one thing. Because if you change one thing, it actually changes everything. in a way. You know what I mean? If you
Yeah.
just keep
Yeah.
on change, even if it's like a 5% shift, a 5% shift will change the trajectory of that thing that, you want to see a result in. And I think just sometimes if we just be mindful that it all starts with us. You know what I mean? Like, I want the team to be this and I want that to happen. It's like, okay, so let's bring the fingers back to us and let's make sure that we are operating at that level of integrity. Because, Jono, when you see someone who operates with full integrity, there's just, I don't know, there's just a power about them. Do you know what I mean? Like there
Yeah.
is such a sense of honor and, I don't know, integrity. And when we just think of integrity as far as structural, it's like it can't be blown over. You know what I mean? It's really strong and confident.
Yes. Yeah. 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 You're right. No, I love that picture. Well, I want to ask you, Jen, about. I want to ask you about you a little bit, and as a starting point, I want you to think back to your childhood and when you were growing up. And I'm interested to know what moments from that season of your life or themes have really shaped you becoming the person and the leader you are today.
Oh, wow. Okay, so thinking back, I grew up in the inner city in a place called Woolloomooloo in Sydney, and I had a twin sister, and we lived in a housing commission. So the streets were all terrace houses, and everyone knew everyone in the street. So it was a very communal, very, I don't know, active community. And we would, I think of every Saturday morning, we would practice doing, I don't know, concerts and that. And then we would go to old people's homes and things like that. And so I remember thinking I loved the practice of it because, I get to hang out with my friends, I learn something new, and then we actually perform. And there was this sense of doing service, but also having fun. And so that was one thing I think that really impacted the way in
Yeah.
which I operate today. And
Mm-hmm.
also the way in which my parents operated. Like our house was always open to everyone. Like there'd often be, all the kids, sitting around the dining room table having a chat and things like that. And so our door was always open. And I think that really impacted that we were, it was, there was no secrets in a way in our family, because you just couldn't. There was always someone in and about and things like that. Yeah. So
Yeah.
those are two that come to mind. Yeah, straight
Yeah.
off.
I love it. No, it's great. Speaking of your parents, um, are there any moments that you remember with how they handled particular situations, or that have really been imprinted on your memory, and once again, things that you've learned and used today? Anything that you remember from that stage of life about them?
I always remember our mother always, like asking questions before making a judgment or a decision about something. So she would
Mm.
always, sit down quite, in a really considered way. It was like she was a bit of an investigator, you know. Yeah, but she said this and she did that and blah blah blah. And so, okay, so let's start from the beginning. And so she would then get us to actually talk through what the story was and what the situation, and she'd get us to really think about what we were complaining about. So I think that was a really important lesson. And it's interesting you asked me that too, because my mum, even today, she's a really great storyteller and she likes to ask questions. So I'll have to remind her about that. Thanks, Jono. That's good. You know how sometimes you know, you appreciate people, but sometimes being really specific about what you appreciate about them is so powerful.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I know that about my mum, And then my father, who's passed away, he was a real
Mm.
action oriented person. He
Mm-hmm.
was a real simple, nothing really complex about him. He was like a meat and three veg, and that's all, we would have most of the time when he would cook and things like that. But he was very action oriented. If he said he was going to do something, he would do it.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's what I loved about my father. Like I never heard him say a bad word about anybody.
Wow.
He kind of like looked at the best of people,
Mm.
but his action oriented approach. And, I was listening to something even this morning about, the things about knowing thyself and the things that you can control. And the
Mm.
three things really that we can control is our perceptions, like how we interpret the world, the
Mm-hmm.
decisions that we make, and the actions that we then take
Mm.
based on that. And that was the big thing for my father. He was
Mm.
very action oriented, sometimes a little bit too much, you know what I mean? Like he'd jump into action before the consideration. So that's the thing that I have to really I have to work on as well, because I'm a very action oriented person. And so
Yeah.
over the years, knowing thyself has been really important, because sometimes it is good to just let that email hang a bit, in your draft box before you send it. And
That's
maybe not
right.
make that phone call or make that purchase, or, things like that. And more, it's, I see the value of it. And so more and more, I'm getting so good at it.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. Thank you so much for sharing those wonderful stories um, about your parents. What about growing up? Do you remember the first chance or opportunity you had in, open quotation marks leadership, where you had a group of people that you were leading, or you were leading a project? Do you like, what comes to mind as the first sort of leadership opportunity in your young life?
So I think it would have been in the playground when we wanted to. I think there was something that happened in the community, and we wanted to do a fundraiser. And I remember collecting, I don't know, cans of food and things like that. And that was a project that I took on. And what I learned from that is that sometimes leadership isn't that easy. You're going to get fingers pointed saying, hey, I could have done that better. And why didn't you do it this way? And I just remember thinking, oh, I'm just trying to do my best. And you still get judged by it. So that was, for me, that was a real, I don't know, it was a very interesting insight, because I think up to that point, I assumed that if your intentions were good, everything was going to roll out good. But it's not always the way. You might have a good intention, but then it may not end up that way either, or people
Yes.
may not agree with everything that you do. So that was an insight for me. It's like, just because it's my perception and my
Mm.
intention, that definitely doesn't mean that everyone else is going to get on board with that. And so I really started to understand that diversity of thinking and go, holy, okay, right, I've got a bit to learn here. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. I always enjoy hearing parallels, like the parallel there between the playground and the corporate boardroom is
Yeah.
is a good one, because there are some things there are some principles that remain the same. That's wonderful. As you grew a bit
Oh,
older,
totally.
finished as you sort of finished school, and after that, sort of in that next season of life, when was
Hmm.
the next sort of significant leadership jump for you, where you felt like, oh, okay, I'm in the deep end. Now I've got a bit on my plate when it comes to managing people, leading a project, whatever it was.
Right. So after school, I actually went into the New South Wales Police Service, and I was in general duties for a couple of years. And then I went into physical evidence. I was in organisation analysis. I also created or helped create a program called the Police Women's Network, where we'd invite, speakers from all around Australia to come and address women in the police service and looking at different, HR policies and things like that. So there were it was like informal leadership for me, really. When I look at it, I was always involved in that extracurricular programs where there wasn't anything formalized, but I could see a gap and then wanted to create something around that. So I was in the police service for about 10 years. And then after that, I left the police service and then had a business in import export. Like I've done, like when you reach my age, which is, 58 now, it's like you've had three lifetimes in one. And sometimes, like when you're asking these questions, Jono, it's like, oh my gosh, like I have to go back decade and decade and decade.
Yeah.
And so, and then, having your own business, that's a whole nother level of leadership because, it's not just leading yourself, it's leading, the team, the business,
Mm.
understanding finance, your stakeholders. So that was another step up, and also having different projects around the place. And then after that, I became a personal trainer, and I was asked to coordinate some programs with um, a health studio, and which was wonderful. Like I really enjoyed that. So over the years, I've always stepped into some type of role that
Mm.
involved creating teams or leading people in all different avenues and areas. And then, completed my MBA, and then decided to, go into business with my sister.
Wow, what a fantastic story. I want to ask you about your time in the police. What did you learn
Mm.
about leadership from that season? And are there any stories that come to mind that were really aha moments for you in your life from those years in the police service?
Yes. Okay. So I remember I was a constable, and I was one of the youngest constables. So I was actually 18 when I passed out, meaning when you get your appointments and that, and you were supposed to be 19, but they allowed me through, only because it was, I don't know, a few months past or whatever. So I remember going out, and at that time we were, I think, collecting warrants. And so you knock on people's doors and say, look, you've got outstanding warrants. When do you think you'd be able to pay them? If you don't, you need to come into the station, etc., etc. And I remember my sergeant said to me, Jan, I just want to let you know you're going to catch more bees with honey. And I thought, right, okay. And so the message is the kinder and more open and friendly you can be in your interactions with people, it creates I don't know, a better way of operating or communication, as opposed to knocking on the door and going, this is the police, this is an official warning, etc., etc. And for me, that was a really lovely insight, because being young and having a uniform, I thought, oh, okay, I've got to be a certain way. And he just reminded me, yeah, just be yourself, it's okay, you know what I mean? You don't have to, push too hard. You can be kind, and you can be official, or efficient
Yes.
or competent. And it was just a nice reminder that they're not mutually exclusive. You can be competent and you can be kind. You can be
Yes.
thoughtful and you can be a really critical thinker. They're not
Mm.
exclusive. So for me, that was a really good insight at the very beginning. And then I remember when I was stationed at Randwick Police Station, one of the first stations that I was at, and we had we called our, first class sergeant Boss Brogan, and he was just a really cool sergeant. Like, he'd bring you into the office if, your paperwork wasn't up to date, and you go, Turco, you're a great police officer, but you really need to be on top of your paperwork. So, let's make sure that blah, blah, blah. And I don't know, and he was just matter of fact about it. He didn't shame you for not doing something, but he was really clear about what he expected. So for
Mm,
me, a really important lesson was clear expectations. Like I knew now that if
yeah,
I got some paperwork in my tray, within a week it needed to be cleared. That was it. So
so good.
I knew that expectation, and it just made life so much easier.
That is so good. Clear expectations are uh, they're such a they're not quite a silver bullet, but I feel like they're going back to that idea of knowing yourself. If you can lead with clear expectations, it's like there's 10 different
Mm.
symptoms that go away because you're going to be able to catch things earlier. I'm interested to know did your how did your boss, how did that sergeant manage, like what did you observe about how to do clear expectations without the shame and guilt trip? How did he do that?
He was just upfront, and he was a nice guy. Like he didn't make it public. He brought you in. He said, Turco, just want to let you know that this is a way in which we do things around here. So he was clear. He was he wasn't formal about it, but I knew at the end of the conversation what was expected of me. And next time I saw him, it wasn't as if something had gone, pear shaped or whatever. It would just be as usual, communication as usual.
Yeah.
And he was just really well loved. He was just really, I don't know, upfront, clear, talk straight, and he'd come and have a drink with you every now and then. Not all the time, because he
Yeah.
was, the first class sergeant, but every now and then he'd come for a drink on a Friday night or, after the shift or whatever. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
and he
So
was
good.
honest, he was
Yes.
honest.
And so I just had this thought pop in my head, and I'm always aware that listeners might have the same thing. So I'll ask it when it comes to expectations and accountability. So he'd bring you and tell you what was his sort of approach if someone was a repeat offender. How did he manage any sort of escalation, or did you observe that?
Well, it actually, because he was on top of it, it actually never got to a stage because it was a cultural thing. And it was really interesting. I didn't realize this when I first went to the station, but it was everyone at that station knew that was the expectation. So it was kind of like we don't have slackers around here. That it wasn't
Yes.
something that we put up with. And I didn't actually see him transfer anyone out. I just observed that everyone kind of got on board. And if they didn't get on board, they wouldn't hang around as long,
Oh, I love it.
because I think he had a bit of a reputation that this is the way in which this station is run.
Yeah, what I love about that, Patrick Lencioni, who I think I've already mentioned, he talks about this idea of peer to peer accountability, and I love
Oh,
that
yeah,
culture.
yeah.
Yeah, and that's what you just described, right? That culture where people hold each other accountable because you've been clear about it, because he's willing to call people in and have the difficult conversations, but he does it in an informal, gentle, kind sort of way, or matter of
Mm.
fact, without getting emotional about it. Uh, and what you end up with over time is a culture where the people in your team and the culture itself holds people to account. That's just awesome. That's so great that it comes through in that story, Jan.
Oh, and that's a high performing team, isn't it? You know what I mean? When people can hold each other to account and just check in, like the way in which we check in as far as accountability, like, hey, John, I noticed that, you weren't able to put that report in on time. What's going on, mate? Do you need a hand, or, do you need to talk about something? It's not straight into judgment. It's about just checking in. And that's when I think, when you've got that care factor
Mm,
happening,
Yeah.
That's when, I think that's the foundation piece.
Yes.
And yeah, when you can hold each other to account, yeah, brilliant. That's when you've got that high performing team.
So moving forward, what about your time in the import export business? What was your biggest lesson about leadership from that season, and any stories that really pop out into your mind that have stuck with you about leadership?
So, I know it sounds really, I don't know, it might sound bigger than what it was, the import export. So, at that time, we moved to New Zealand, and we would travel around New Zealand with our wares, and I would be the upfront man. And so, we would have some local sales, but we'd also get sales from overseas. And I suppose for that, it was really about self leadership. When you're knocking on doors, creating sales, and sometimes you'd get a rejection and sometimes you'd get a sale. You could go from the top of the mountain to the bottom of the pit. And so for me, I learned about self-regulation. Like, circumstances aren't the dictator of how I feel. It's I decide how I want to feel independent of circumstances. And that's self mastery. And when that happens over and over and over again, you practice it. So whether or not I get a sale, that's great, but it's not going to determine how I feel. It's not going to determine, how I view
Mm,
myself. It's
yes.
like I decide how I view myself and the meaning I make from it. And for me, it was really about self mastery and self leadership. That's what I learned during the import export. Because when you get a big sale, it's like, yeah, like we're happy now. And when we didn't get it, we go down and like, nah, I don't want to live like this. That's like a puppet on a string, because you really can't control that. The only thing you can control really is your perception about it. So it was like, okay, well, that person, that, organization wasn't our fit. Let's go on to the next one. So it's actually how to soothe yourself and to tell a different story in order to, move forward. Because otherwise,
Yes.
yeah, it's just too hard.
Yeah. Yeah. I do you have any advice on for those listening going, oh, wow, I am such a yo yo. I am such a puppet on a string. I'm so excited one week when things are going well, but when the numbers are a bit down, it really moves me all the way down. Any advice? What have you learned? Any habits that you've implemented, or any tips you'd give to people who want to be more like that?
Yeah. So first of all, it's like we're human, right? So yeah, that's going to happen. Like, because sometimes I'll say to my husband, "Oh, I just can't believe I'm frustrated by this." And he said, "Jan, you're not enlightened yet. You're still a physical person in a physical environment. Be easy on yourself." And so, oh yeah, okay. Like, when we were talking about having high expectations, how we hold ourselves to really high expectations sometimes. So first of all, be easy
Mm,
on yourself, and
yep.
second of all, I think if you have your own internal practice, something that you do every day that actually supports your well-being. So whether it's meditation or physical, activity, or greeting the sun of a morning, or swimming in the ocean, something that fills you up. And that's one of the things that we talk about with any of our clients. In any 24-hour period, what is the one thing that you look forward to, that you have something to look forward to, that nourishes, your soul? And when
Mm,
you have a practice of that, of, filling yourself up, that's when, you've got the capacity to regulate and to understand, where you can, I don't know, move as
mm-hmm.
opposed to push through something. It's like
Mm-hmm.
you can settle your nervous system to such an extent that you can actually hear what needs to be heard. You'll pick up those signals about what you need to do. You'll actually get that, I don't know, that intuitive prompt to make the phone call, send the email, or pick up the phone. And when you have a practice like that, I think that's one thing that I think really supports people when
Yes.
you don't want to be that puppet on a string. And then it's practice. It's like, what meaning can I make out of this situation that is going to support me? Because life really is meaningless. Like, we make the meaning from it. I often use the story about when a bird eats a worm, it doesn't then feel guilty about eating a worm. It just does that because that's its nature to do it. So life, I don't think, has a judgment. We're the one who has the judgment of it. So let's just make a good judgment. Let's just say, okay, so what could possibly
Mm,
be supportive or good about this situation that I'm not even seeing yet?
yeah.
Now, if someone is in crisis, I would never ask that question at the beginning. Like, we've just had floods in the northern rivers, and
Yes.
people have lost their homes and livelihoods, and it's been very traumatic. And you wouldn't ask that question at all now, but in a couple of years' time, I know that there will be I don't know, something that has come from this. It's just not now
Yes.
is
Yeah.
the time to ask it. But
Mm-hmm.
from a personal point of view, on a day-to-day basis, what was good about this situation? So if I had
Mm,
an argument, with my son or whatever, it's like, okay, so what could be good about this? Okay, we're getting clearer about what's working and what's not working. What did I learn about myself that I was still triggered about that? Am I really judging, when I don't really want to judge? So it's that reflective question,
mm.
I think,
Yeah.
is really important.
One thing I want to ask you about, you mentioned having something to look forward to every day. Any examples like that you've seen people implement or that you've implemented? Because I love that idea, and as soon as you mentioned it, I was trying to think of, oh well, what might be an example? So I thought I'd ask.
Oh, okay. So it can be as simple as your morning coffee. Like, when I have a coffee of a morning, it's not the first thing I have. I always have my hot water and lemon and all that kind of stuff. But then I have my coffee. And I love my coffee. Like, like, when I'm drinking my coffee, I go, oh, I love you. You know what I mean? Like, I can feel it in my body going, yay.
Yeah.
And another thing that I love doing is swimming the ocean, because I live in Byron Bay, which is the most easterly point of Australia. So we've got a beautiful ocean, and so that's
Oh,
one
pretty
thing that I
amazing.
love doing.
Pretty amazing place to live.
It it is, yeah, and the sea life, and seeing, turtles and dolphins and things like that. So whenever I'm in the ocean, I'm kind of like in my happy place. But for others, I have a girlfriend whose job it is to greet the sun of the morning. That's her job. And so that's what she does. Every morning she is out on the beach greeting the sun. And for
Mm,
other people, it's meditating in the morning, or reading something, or listening to something that's inspiring, or going for a walk with their dog. So it's just
yeah.
something that, I don't know, opens you up and nourishes you.
Yeah. No, I
Like, it's
love that.
nourishing.
I think something that surprised me in the past couple of years, love uh I love all things leadership. I really love
Mhm.
productivity. I love any kind of improvement, probably, to be honest about anything in life. And so I've found this YouTube channel. It's called Productivity Game, and I've mentioned it a few times on the podcast. But Nathan from Productivity Game does the best book summaries that are usually around 8 or 9 minutes, but he actually authentically reads the whole book, applies it, and brings
Oh,
his
great.
key
Yeah,
ideas, but in a very
great.
thorough, refreshing way. Like, he's a great communicator, and I love his videos. And so for me, one of my favorite things to do is to just switch on. Like, that's only 8 or 9 minutes, but I find that when there's a new book that comes out and he does a review of it, I jump on and watch that. Sometimes I'll just watch a couple of summaries of other books, because he's now done over 200. And for me, there's something about that I just it's the ideas, it's these, like, he
Yeah.
reviews great books, so it's always brilliant ideas, and that to me just like fuels me, and I can watch a couple of those and it just completely changes my perspective.
I wrote that down. I'm totally into that. I'm definitely
Oh,
going to do that.
you're gonna
Yeah.
love it.
Um, yeah.
He just did a great one on the Dopamine Nation. He did a review of that book. I don't know if you've seen that, which is all about the science of dopamine, and it's fascinating. It's a book that I've heard a lot about, but his summary of it is just fantastic. He just sums up the big ideas, and it's animated, and then he introduces them at the start, unpacks them, and then summarizes them. It's so simple. But Anna Lemke, I've spoken about her in previous podcasts, but yeah, books like that,
Mm.
that if I read it, like and so what I do is I tend to watch and I pick my favorite ones, and then I go and read that book, so that when I'm reading a book, I know it's
Ah,
something that's,
nice.
yeah, that is
Yes.
really going to be. So I have a couple of books right now. A book that I love recommending that I'm going to go and really dig into is Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. That's one that's on my list
Hmm.
to really get into. The Dopamine Nation is another one that I just mentioned that I really want to read, and then I think there's another one from him which I'll look up. But that YouTube channel is one of my favorites. I just find myself recommending it everywhere because it's so. Oh, that's right. So he's just done. Uh, he's just done a couple of other ones. The Power of Regret by Daniel Pink, which is an interesting one. And
Oh,
then
yeah.
David and Goliath by Malcolm Gladwell. I don't know if that's a new book. It might be Malcolm's latest book or if he's just gotten around to it. But that's another fascinating one that talks about why underdogs um, can win. And why the David and Goliath story isn't that surprising. It's this really interesting take on it, saying here are some principles if you're in an underdog situation. So yes, you can probably hear that I'm a big fan of Productivity Game.
Love that. Love that. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm on top of that, and I'm going to do that. So it's really interesting because over the years, that was all the books that I would read. It would always be around leadership, productivity, culture. And it's only in the last couple of months that I've decided to just pull back and go in a different direction, just to, I don't know, just to change things up a little bit. And so, reading books like The Dictionary of Lost Words,
Mm,
Midnight Library. I don't know. There are just a couple of things that just fueling the imagination a little bit on a different side, just to kind of balance things up. And so I also listen to a lot of Vedic information and Vedic texts because I've been meditating for 30 years. So I'm really interested in
mm,
Ayurveda and all things, Indian and Sanskrit and things like that. So
yeah.
I do like the idea, though, of the synopsis of the books. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
it
great.
makes it
Thank you.
really accessible. No, I love this idea
Yeah,
of finding
yeah.
something to look forward to because I've just thought of another thing that I do, and I've only done it for the past. Well, it's probably been 4 or 5 years now. I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but I uh, I decided I love reading great stories, but I always get very it's quite really sad and disappointing when you finish a book because especially if you read it
Oh,
fast because it's so
yes.
good, right? So
Yes, yes.
I said that's it. I'm going to look for like the longest series of books where it's brilliantly written. And I know this is so funny. This is how my brain works, Jan. So I found this series initially by an author called Raymond Feist, and it's about 24, 25 books, and over about 2 years, I just read one a month, and it's sci-fi fantasy. So we've got like different worlds and dwarves and elves, and it's so I have just loved it. And for me, I will often read. Well, when I say read, my wife Liz always says, "Are you reading? You're listening." So I will listen to the audiobooks when I'm going to bed because once again, it's just that really nice. Like otherwise, my brain is always ticking with 50 things to do with clarity. That's
Yeah.
just the ideas. Like I said, even with the book Productivity Game, I love ideas. So there's something about just entering into another world and hearing a great writer who just unpacks these wonderful, rich stories that I've
Mm.
found just suddenly it makes that sort of going to bed time. It gives me something to really look forward to listen to this great fiction. So that's a bit similar to you, like it's a different type of reading, but I've found that wonderfully relaxing, enjoyable, really great for sort of switching off from work. And so that's another thing I've implemented now that I think about it.
So what's the series called? And it's an audio. Did you get it on audio?
Yes, yeah. So it's very popular. So it should be. I think all of his books are on Audible or wherever you get audiobooks. They should be there. It's called. So the author is Raymond E. Feist, Feist, and the
Okay.
first book is called The Magician. The only problem with the first book is it's
Mm.
so good. It is so good that the rest of the series
Oh,
doesn't quite like it's just brilliant because it's introducing all of these things. So it's the first time it's all being introduced. So that it's just like the character development. It's brilliant. So the rest of the series is good, but that first book is great. So yeah, The Magician is what the first book's called. I think the whole series is called the Rift War Saga. Um,
mhm.
and
I'm
yeah,
definitely gonna download that because I've just finished an audio book called Where the Crawdads Sing, and it was one of those books that I didn't want it to finish. So I
yes.
absolutely understand what you're going through. So yeah, I'm totally up for that.
Well, the cool thing is like Magician. So it's actually called the first book's called Magician. Raymond Feist wrote that in
Mhm.
1982. So you're literally, it's also like someone's life's work like is just so I finished those, and rather than being disappointed, you've read so many that you're kind of like, okay, fair enough.
Right, you're
I read
satiated.
I
Yeah,
read 2 years worth. I'm ready for this to be finished now. It's still a bit sad, but
yeah.
and then another one is Brandon.
I love the way you think. Yeah.
Yeah, Brandon Sanderson is another really good one. He has written. I'm in the middle of one of his series called the Mistborn series, but yeah, I love fantasy sort of. Sci-fi-ish sort of, just I just find it really enjoyable. I think it's just the character development. I would probably enjoy other authors too. So if people are listening and have a favorite long series by in a completely different genre, then let me know because it's so much fun. It's just wonderful to finish a book and then pick up the next one. Oh, go like in Audible. I just literally go download the next one, press play. Um,
Yes,
and then
yes.
away you go. Yeah, so they're a couple of my favorite authors, Raymond Feist and Brandon Sanderson. Um, Another one is Robert Jordan, who they've just released a show called The Wheel of Time on Amazon, which is his book series is called The Wheel of Time. There's probably 16 books or 20 books in that one, so that's very very well known and highly reviewed everywhere. So that's another series I'd recommend. Robert Jordan. So yeah, there you go, Jan. Got a few years of reading for you.
Excellent. Thank you. Yes, done. Thank you.
Well, what I would love to do, Jan, we've just had so much fun chatting. I'm looking at the time, and I've gone over, and so what I would love to do is invite you back for another episode, and what we can do is maybe chat a bit more about your journey, but also maybe even hear a bit some of the biggest aha moments you've had from working with clients and what you're seeing out there. Because I know we did talk
Mm,
about that before
mm.
we pressed record, and in the end, I couldn't help. We've ended up chatting more about you, which has been wonderful. But yeah, and then I can also do Leadership Express with you another time, just because we're out of time now. So yeah, the invitation is there. Would love to have you back, and but it's just been so much fun to have you on today.
Oh, same here, Jono. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you. And I've learned so many. Like I've got things to do now and books to download. So thank you.
That's right. Let me know how you go with those. Well, let me say thank you to our listeners for tuning in. I hope you've enjoyed. I know some of those recommendations will be helpful to listeners, but I know the stories from Jan, from the police force, about Jan's parents. They've just been wonderful stories, full of leadership principles to go and apply. So thank you to our listeners. Don't forget, I also have the John O'White Leadership Podcast and the Leadership Question of the Day podcast. And Jan, where can people find you who have just loved hearing from you today? Where can they find out more about your podcast and about your work?
Yeah, they can just go to our website, People Leaders.
Beautiful. So make sure you
And
go
just
and
remember, it's not people often say people eaters. It's like, no, people leaders.
very different.
Yeah, there you
Very,
go.
very
I
different
know.
types of
I
consulting.
know. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, that just sums up the time we've had. Wonderfully, that's it's been very fun chatting with you, Jan. Thank you so much for being so generous and sharing your wisdom and being so vulnerable to share some amazing stories. I really appreciate you coming on. It's been a joy.
My pleasure. Thanks, Jono.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Leadership Conversations podcast as much as I did. If you're joining us for the first time, don't forget to check out consultclarity.org. That's our website, consultclarity.org. We have so many free resources on there, including our 7 Questions on Leadership series. We've had more than 1,500 leaders from all over the world in all different roles, in different industries, answer these 7 questions on leadership, and leaders give these in-depth answers around how they spend their time, a book that's been significant for them. It's just a gold mine. It's completely free to access, so go to consultclarity.org and look for that. We'd also love to interview you about your leadership. I believe your experience, your life, your context means that you have advice on leadership that other leaders can learn from. Yes, you, if you're going, not me, well, no, I really believe you would have something to add. So if you're looking for a way to give back, it's completely free to get involved. And we would love to interview you through the 7 Questions on Leadership. You just go to consultclarity.org/7-questions-interest, or Google consultclarity.org 7 questions interest and fill out the form and get involved. We have a free resource on our website called the Leadership Survival Guide. It's a 57-page ebook, 10 world-class leaders giving their thoughts on leadership, and that's completely free. It's available on our homepage, consultclarity.org, right at the top, so make sure you go and get that and download it today. And we have a free daily email that you can subscribe to. We send this out to over 15,000 leaders from around the world. And it contains the highlights of content from our podcasts, our blogs, our books we're reading. It's got the best content, and it gives you exclusive, limited, early access to our masterclasses, workshops, new products, special offers. It's all for our subscribers. You can go to consultclarity.org/subscribe and join 15,000 other leaders. And my gift to you is to work really hard, particularly through the Leadership Conversations podcast. I have been blown away by the quality of the leaders, and I'm learning as much as anyone in doing these interviews. So I'm having a great time. And my gift to you is to keep lining up the best leaders I can to invest in your leadership. Your gift to me, if you're finding this helpful, there is something that you could do that would help us out massively. And that is to write a review and to leave a rating for our podcast or wherever you're watching or listening to this. I can't tell you how much that helps us out. Also, subscribe or follow. It really does make a difference in helping us to help more leaders become everything they're meant to be. Another thing that means a lot to me personally is when I see our community share our content. So if you do share this or any other piece of content on social media, then thank you, and please do that. And look for me, Jono White, or Clarity, and tag us in your post. Our team is always looking for posts to engage with from our community, and there's also a chance that we'll share your content to go beyond and share it with our followers. Last of all, you can check out my book. It's called Step Up or Step Out: How to Deal with Difficult People Even If You Hate Conflict. I wrote this book because 50% of the coaching sessions I have with leaders, this topic comes up again and again and again. And it's this idea of, how do I have this difficult conversation? How do I lead this person better when I'm finding them difficult? Or in some cases, you look and you say, I think I might be leading a difficult person. They're just quite difficult to lead, or I'm finding them quite difficult to lead. So there's a 3-step process that I unpack in Step Up or Step Out. And the amazing thing, and I've literally done this myself, and I've heard it anecdotally from other leaders as I've coached them, is that if you follow this process, you will see that person step up and change their behavior or make a decision, which is to step out some of the time. 95% of the time, people will step up or step out in just 4 weeks. And I stand by that. It's you have to read the book to understand, but I really do believe in it, and I've experienced it firsthand. It works. So you can go to Amazon, look up Step Up or Step Out John O. White, or store.consultclarity.org/book. Well, thank you so much for listening. We're going to be back with a new episode next time of the Leadership Conversations podcast. And I hope today has helped you to take another step towards becoming the leader you're meant to be. See you next time.